top 40 index closing up 0.11% and the broader all share up 0.41%. Naspers led the top 40 index higher, up 3.34% after it completed its plan to spin off and unbundle shares in Africa's largest pay TV business, MultiChoice. MultiChoice listed on the JSE last week, but shares in the newly independent company were only unbundled to Naspers shareholders on Monday. Coming up in the show tonight. Nigeria loses billions of naira on a monthly basis due to inactive oil refineries. A UK patient may be free of HIV after stem cell treatment in London. And this Ugandan innovator turns to clean energy to save trees in the country. We begin in South Africa. Africa's largest asset manager, the PIC, still remains in limbo amid allegations of bribery and corruption. The board's chairman is currently under investigations of alleged collusion on certain deals in which the Public Investment Corporation had invested. CGTN Sumitra Naidu caught up with the chair to get his side of the story.
I call it a figment of anyone's imagination to say I've been involved in deals in PIC, to say we are forming a cabal, to say I'm captured by somebody.
The PIC chair is currently under investigation after a whistleblower came forward with allegations of impropriety. But Mondli Gungubele says he's being targeted after he initiated a probe into the PIC's investment in IO Technology Solutions. The PIC invested $290 million in the company in December 2017, a deal that was apparently pushed by political connections.
I'm happy that there are investigations to clear the... my suspicion, and I feel very strong about it, is that this is just mud that's being thrown in our faces for doing the work we're doing now in press.
IO parent company African Empowerment Equity Investments is owned by controversial businessman Iqbal Survey. Survey is accused of duping the PIC into investing in IO. IO listed on the JSE in December 2017 at $3.08. It's now trading at $1.26. The PIC effectively lost $178 million.
When you deal with those issues, you are really rattling the nest. And it's my view that criminals are going to be shaken. But watch the space. Whether indeed criminals are correct that I'm corrupt, or what I'm saying is true that criminals are trying to push back. And I can tell you, in a short space of time, my name will be cleared.
The Companies and Intellectual Property Commission has ordered the PIC to recoup all of the money it invested in IO, saying that it shouldn't have made the investment in the first place. While the PIC figures that out, it's also under pressure to assist other state-owned entities. Eskom received $5 billion from government, but the power utility needs 5 times more than that, and it's looking at the PIC.
PIC is open to dealing with the loan book of Eskom, for instance, buy it and do something else with it, which will translate in liquidity in Eskom. PIC is also discussing the possibility of turning the loan into equity, and then that which was a loan turned into a balance sheet of what we call, and turned into an asset to Eskom.
Last week, the National Assembly adopted the PIC Amendment Bill to improve governance. If passed, all investment decisions will need to go through Parliament first. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
A travesty of justice, unjustifiable and despicable. That's how top Zimbabwean government and ruling ZANU-PF officials have described U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to extend sanctions on the Southern African nation for another year. The U.S. claims the country's new government poses an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. foreign policy.
Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Information, Nick Mangwana, called the extension of the sanctions a travesty of justice against the people of Zimbabwe and says there seems to be a lack of consideration of their effects on ordinary citizens. Zimbabwe has long argued that the embargoes have adversely impacted social service delivery. 141 ZANU-PF-linked entities and individuals, including President Emmerson Mnangagwa, are subject to the sanctions. The ruling ZANU-PF has condemned their continued imposition.
This perpetuation of hostilities by the USA and other like-minded countries is unjustifiable, despicable, and contemptible, to say the least, as it comes against clear efforts by the government of Zimbabwe towards the implementation of its national reform agenda, including engagement and re-engagement policy.
Despite the setback, it says it will continue to try to normalize relations with the West.
Our policies will continue with the engaging and the re-engagement to those who are interested. We're not at war with anybody. We're a very peace-loving country. And all we're saying is that the new dispensation creates an opportunity for all peace-loving people to work together and move forward.
The U.S. has demanded democratic and economic reforms to lift the punitive measures. ZANU-PF insists it's made remarkable progress in that regard, including the holding of a vastly improved and widely endorsed election in July 2018. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Data from the Nigerian National Petroleum Commission suggests that Nigeria is losing billions of naira on a monthly basis. This is due to the inability of the country's refineries to function optimally. According to the NNPC, its revenue had decreased, leading to the loss of around $632.7 billion between April and November last year. On the one hand, Nigeria's economy is heavily dependent on oil revenues, and on the other, the country may have to continuously turn to the importation of petroleum products to meet demand. Let's get more now from Deji Badmas, who's live for us in Lagos. So, Deji, in just 7 months last year, the NNPC says it lost $633 million due to the inability of the country's refineries to function optimally. Those are astronomical figures. What is causing this incapacitation at the refineries?
Well, Peninnah, those refineries have been not been quite operational for a very long time. The refineries actually have a history of not operating up to their optimal capacity. And so it's no surprise at all. Unfortunately, we've seen a situation where successive governments have had to spend enormous amount of money on the refineries, and they just didn't succeed in getting them to work to their capacity. And part of the problem, of course, we understand is some people would tell you part of the problem is corruption. Some would say it's sabotage from within. And then we also have a network of pipelines that are actually not reliable. So it's been a very big issue. It's been a very big problem. It's not a surprise at all that the NNPC is reporting this huge loss, because what the NNPC has basically done all this while is to rely on imports. I mean, import of refined petroleum products. Ordinarily, these refineries are supposed to be refining about 450,000 barrels of oil consumed in Nigeria daily. But unfortunately, that has not happened. I'm not very sure it's happened since the 3 or 4 of them were actually built. But the government says it's still committed to turning it around. But everyone is only just hoping and banking on the private refinery that is coming up. That's the 650,000 barrels per day refinery that has been built by Dangote here in Lagos. Everybody expects that when that comes on stream, then we might just end this cycle of refined petroleum importation in the country, and then save the country a lot of foreign exchange.
All right, Deji, so we're going to touch on that Dangote refinery in a bit, but in a country, Deji, that is so heavily reliant on oil, what impact is this having on the economy?
Enormous impact, Peninnah, enormous impact. Let's start with the issue of foreign exchange. I mean, Nigeria is spending its hard-earned foreign exchange on the importation of refined petrol. And basically, at the moment, it's just NNPC that does importation of petrol. It costs a lot of money. What we have been told is that about 30% of our foreign earnings now goes to the importation of petrol. Now, imagine what impact that would have if you're able to save that. And the reason why we're importing refined petrol is just because we're not able to refine what we can consume here. So we import about, in some cases, about 100% of what we consume. So that is telling on the economy, it's telling on the foreign reserve, it's telling on just basically everything. So it's enormous. It's also affecting local production. no question at all that you know, if you're able to refine locally, you'll be boosting the local market here, but that is not happening. And we saw, for instance, it's also making Nigeria spend so much on subsidy. For instance, the government plans to spend millions of dollars in petrol subsidy in this year's budget. So if we were able to refine, you know, this petrol here locally, all of these savings would have been made. So it's costing this economy so much, so very much, and that's why everyone cannot just wait for that Dangote refinery to come on stream.
Nigeria, Deji, has about 4 refineries, none of which can be said to perform in full capacity. And you mentioned that successive governments have tried to change this situation, but they have failed. Why? Why are they not able to turn that around?
Honestly, it really beats my imagination, to be candid, because, for instance, when the Buhari government came on board, I remember the Minister of State for Petroleum, Ibe Kachuku, he did a lot of work. At some point, things actually picked up, you know, the capacity actually went up a bit, you know, at least beyond the level that they met it. But unfortunately, things hit a reverse. And so it's still quite a surprise that we've just not been able to get it right. But what I also understand, and that's what people have said, is that, look, some of these refineries are quite old, and you know, apart from doing turnaround maintenance, certain things need to change, and that the way, you know, these refineries were built back in those days, the way things are done now are quite different. But fact is, the government keeps spending enormous amount of money on turnaround maintenance. But you know, after turning things around, they work for some time, and then things go bad. But also very important, Peninnah, is the fact that the network of pipelines we have in this country are usually frequently sabotaged. So you have a situation where, for instance, you want to refine petrol in a place like the city of Warri, for instance, or you want to send this petrol to depots across the country. The pipelines are not reliable. You're not able to do that, so you may have to resort to trucking them across the country. So these are challenges, but the bottom line is that, well, the refineries are not performing well, and that's why it became a huge debate during the presidential campaign. You know, one of the candidates, for instance, saying that NNPC has become a cesspit of corruption, and that the first thing he would do would be to sell the 4 refineries. And, you know, it's a major issue in this country. The labor unions don't want to see that happen. They also believe that the government has the capacity to fix it, but unfortunately, despite everything that successive governments have done, we're still coming back to the same situation. The refineries not performing to optimal capacity, in some cases performing as low, you know, below even 10%. So it's something that is actually really difficult to understand and really difficult to explain. So we're just waiting to see what the Buhari government will do about the refineries, whether it will sell them or privatize, you know, partially privatize them. The Obasanjo administration actually privatized the refineries, but the government that succeeded it, that's the Yaradua government, reversed the sale of the refineries, that they were not transparently done. We just have to wait and see what happens. But to be candid, you know, it's eating deep into the country's purse.
All right, so let's talk about that Dangote refinery that you mentioned a little earlier. From what we understand, Dangote is putting finishing touches to what will arguably become one of the biggest refineries in Africa, perhaps even the world. So you said Nigerians are looking forward to this. Why, Deji? How is that going to change the country's oil sector?
Well, at least basically it will make Nigeria stop the importation of petrol. So it means it will save us that hard foreign currency now we spend. So it means we'll begin to rely on the Dangote refinery now for our local supplies. And what we've been told is that what will be coming out of the Dangote refinery would even exceed local consumption, and that at some point Dangote will begin to export some of these products. So it will save the country a lot. To be candid, that is what the government is banking on to resolve this perennial crisis of having to import petrol from abroad all the time. So it's something that everybody is waiting for. We just can't wait for it to happen. The expectation is that it would happen this year or probably early next year. It definitely would save the country a lot of hard-earned currency, because this idea of having to import petrol, you spend so much and then you factor in what you spend on as subsidy as well. It just doesn't make sense. It's a lot of money that the government can actually save and spend on infrastructure and do some other more important things.
All right, Deji Badmas live for us there in Lagos. Many thanks, Deji. So up next, a look at your company roundup. South Africa has appointed a new technical review team to investigate a host of issues at the embattled power utility Eskom. The 11-member team is expected to conduct a rapid but intensive review of the operations, maintenance and the technical environment at all of Eskom's power stations within 4 weeks. Nigerian agri-tech startup Hello Tractor has joined forces with the Technical Center for Agricultural and Rural Cooperation to expand its services across Nigeria and Kenya. Over 5,000 smallholder farmers and youths are set to benefit from the latest business strategy. British telco giant Vodafone is planning to sell about $4.5 billion worth of securities convertible to fund its acquisition of parts of Liberty Global's European businesses. The two sets of sterling-denominated securities will help pay for the $22 billion purchase of Liberty Global's German and Eastern European units. The deal is set to be complete by mid this year. And finally, a Japanese court has granted a $9 million bail to ousted Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn. This was his third bail request and the first by his new legal team. Ghosn has been in custody since his arrest last November on allegations he understated his income at Nissan. And that's a look at your corporate headlines. This is Global Business coming up. Rwanda dismisses reports that it has blocked its border with Uganda. And Egypt signs deals worth $2 billion for wind farms in the country.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head on now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa
To Rwanda now, where the country has dismissed fears of significant trade impact that could result from the current tensions with neighboring Uganda. The State's Foreign Affairs Ministry said that the Rwandan borders remain open and allows entry of people and goods from Uganda, calling the border closure reports misleading. Last week, the Rwandan government abruptly began blocking cargo trucks from Uganda from entering its territory. According to Uganda's government spokesman, the flow of cargo has been eased at Mirama Hills, one of the three main border crossings. Uganda has denied alleged arbitrary detentions of Rwandans. The South African economy grew a mere 0.8% in 2018. Statistics South Africa released the country's fourth quarter GDP on Tuesday, showing a 1.4% rise in growth in the last 3 months of 2018. It's a touch higher than expected, but still a long way off from the growth the country needs. CGTN Sumitra Naidu reports.
There was a sigh of relief when the numbers were released, but no celebration. The South African economy remains under pressure and needs to grow a lot more in order to address real issues of poverty and unemployment.
It was slightly better than what the market was expecting. At 1.4%, the market was looking for 1.2%, so you would say a little bit ahead of expectations, but there's not much in it. The other thing that I think was important in the data is that some of the previous quarters were revised, particularly the third quarter data was revised slightly better. So it means that for 2018 as a whole, South Africa grew at 0.8%. That, I guess, in the end was slightly better than what people were thinking around the middle of last year, where some people had growth down at 0.6%.
Agriculture helped to lift growth in the last quarter of 2018, gaining almost 8%. Transport also did well, and manufacturing is showing signs of a steady recovery. But there are still areas of decline.
Mining, very disappointing, contracting further. Then your sort of domestic trade, which includes your wholesale, retail, motor trade, as well as accommodation and catering, which is your sort of broader tourism industry, your hotels and your restaurants, that contracted, so that was disappointing.
And even though agriculture is showing growth, there may still be some headwinds on the horizon.
The latest crop estimate commit figures suggest that this year's summer crop will be lower than last year, and last year wasn't spectacular. We had the breakout of foot-and-mouth disease in parts of among herds in Limpopo, and that obviously will also impact on your animal farming industries. So consequently, you know, it is encouraging that they had a decent quarter in the final quarter of last year, but I think their conditions have already changed for the worst.
The Treasury is forecasting 1.5% growth for 2019. Some economists believe it's ambitious but not unachievable. Electricity supply remains the big concern.
I think for the moment, Moody's is going to focus a little bit more on what's happening around Eskom and the refinancing of Eskom. Is government able to start to implement some of those reforms, particularly some of the cost-cutting reforms? If South Africa cannot improve the growth rate during the course of this year, then it's definitely going to result in further credit rating downgrade.
It's going to be another tough year for South Africa, especially with a slowing global economy. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Egyptian government has signed deals worth $2 billion with a number of companies to establish wind farms in the country. The North African state has been promoting wind farms as another source of renewable energy. It plans to achieve 20% of renewable power in its overall energy by 2022. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
Egypt has established the largest solar plant in the world. It's quickly becoming a natural gas hub in the region, and now is turning to wind energy.
Specifically on wind power, we're seeing a lot of investments coming into Egypt. About $1.6 billion just between two companies that are investing in about 750 megawatt wind power in different parts of Egypt. And this is going to be an extremely important part of our renewable energy mix, because we're going to see about maybe 12% dependency on wind power. Now, let's not forget that Egypt's dependency on fossil fuels is about 92% of our output. But the government has targeted by 2022 that about 20 to 22% of our energy output will be through renewables.
Saudi Aqua Power is another company that's investing $700 million on wind farms in Egypt.
We as EcoPower, we are interested in wind projects in Egypt, and now we are applying for a 500 megawatt wind project in Egypt to be built in the same area on the Red Sea. We are just waiting for the approval from the cabinet on this project. So it's very, very, very attractive, not only for us, but for all investors.
The government has been providing incentives for energy companies to tap the wind power market.
We have many places where the wind speed is very ideal for the wind projects, like, for example, Zafarana area, like all the Red Sea area. This you have wind speed between 8 and 12 meter per second, which is very ideal for the wind project.
And Cairo plans to go overseas with its energy capabilities.
Egypt's ambition is now to become an energy hub within the region, whether it's the southern Mediterranean, whether it is the Arab Gulf, or whether it is Africa itself. By investing in renewable energies such as solar and wind and hydro, Egypt can reach a point of an economies of scale where production, manufacturing of these renewable energy solutions can be done in Egypt, and hence we will be able to transfer these experiences to our African counterparts and different African nations.
It's only been 3 years when the daily power outages was a natural occurrence in Egypt. Now the North African nation has become an exporter of electricity and a regional energy hub. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Since 2011, Tunisia has been facing an economic crisis which has affected many vital sectors. Now, car dealers are frustrated by the increased cost of importing vehicles, which has caused a drop in vehicle sales. CGTN's Adner Shawashi has the story.
According to the president of the car dealers unions, sales revenues dropped between 10% to 15%. The numbers of cars being imported has reduced after value-added tax was increased.
The situation is critical. A 30% reduction in the import quota between 2017 and 2018, a 25% increase in the consumption tax rate on imported vehicles, coupled with 19% rise in VAT, affected the sector. We are losing money.
Dibbish added that import quota for 2018 was 45,000 cars. He called on the government and the Ministry of Trade to increase the quota.
We're importing 25% fewer cars than in 2017. Professionals are facing an unprecedented crisis. The prices of vehicles have skyrocketed and a number of available cars dropped. The state must intervene as soon as possible.
The trade union of car dealers warned that the decline of disposable income for millions of Tunisian consumers pushed sales down. People are complaining about the skyrocketing price of cars in the North African state.
Buying a new car is a dream for many people. Getting a car credit is very expensive.
I'm taking care of my old car because I don't have the financial means to buy a new one. In the past, it was easy to change the vehicle. Now it's impossible.
2 weeks ago, the executive board of the Central Bank of Tunisia raised its benchmark rate by 100 basis points from 6.75% to 7.75%. Analysts believe that car demand will drop again in 2019 due to more interest rate hikes. The trade union of car dealers has warned that the depreciation of the Tunisian dinar against the dollar and euro has ruined many businesses. Economists assert that the dinar will continue its depreciation against foreign currencies. Consequently, the cost of importing and selling cars will be much higher in the next few months. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Global Business. Coming up after the break. A UK patient may be free of HIV after stem cell treatment in London. And India, along with Turkey, lose their special program status in the US. We'll tell you why after this short break.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate
those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Peninnah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
See, business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
And now to one of the biggest stories coming out of Britain. An HIV-positive patient appears to be free of the virus after receiving a stem cell transplant. The unidentified London patient has been free of the virus for 18 months without viral suppressing treatment. The breakthrough comes 10 years after the first such case, known as the Berlin patient. Richard Bestick is live in London and joins us for more on this. Richard, is this patient cured, or is it simply a case of the virus being suppressed to undetectable levels?
I think probably the latter, Peninnah, but it is one of those feel-good stories, isn't it? To put into perspective the scale of this apparent breakthrough, you've only got to go back just a few years when contracting AIDS was in effect a death sentence. The fear that surrounded the disease victims was extraordinary. Do you remember Princess Diana captured the world's attention simply by sitting down next to an AIDS sufferer and holding his hands? It was the 20th century's Great Plague. It came from nowhere and there was apparently no cure. Now the London patient, so-called, has become only the second person ever to be declared in remission. According to his doctors, although it doesn't mean a cure for HIV, it doesn't mean a cure for HIV has been found. It is proof, perhaps, that scientists could one day find that cure. That's according to Professor Ravindra Gupta, an HIV biologist who was co-leader of the medical team working with the London patient. For now, says the professor, it's looking good. The patient is, quote, functionally cured, which is not to say he's cured entirely. It's too early to say that, but it does look like a positive step forward in the ongoing battle against HIV/AIDS. Peninnah.
And Richard, like you mentioned, this is the second time a patient treated this way has ended up in remission from HIV. So should the world be hopeful now of a cure?
Hope, that's the word, Peninnah, you're right. The International AIDS Society has described this as a critical moment in the research for a cure, but that research is still far removed from being a cure in itself, or indeed something that could be extended to a wider population. The patient who has asked for his name to be withheld, hence the name, the London patient, contracted HIV in 2012 and was also diagnosed with a type of blood cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was very ill indeed, Peninnah. As a last resort, he received bone marrow stem cells from a donor with a rare genetic mutation that resists HIV infection. The patient now offers antiretroviral drugs, and 18 months later he's showing those signs of HIV infection. But the whole operation is dangerous and certainly not a cure for everyone. It does tell us, however, Peninnah, that a disease which has killed 35 million people worldwide in the last 4 decades and currently infects 37 million people, has its own vulnerabilities and can be stopped, at least for now, under certain circumstances.
It is certainly a feel-good story, Richard, like you said. Thank you for that update, Richard Bestick, live in London. Turning to trade issues, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office has announced that it intends to remove India and Turkey from a program that provides preferential treatment for a number of developing countries. Take a look.
The USTR's office said that India's elimination from the Generalized System of Preferences program follows its failure to provide the U.S. with assurances that it would provide reasonable access to many of its markets. U.S. President Donald Trump said in a letter to congressional leaders that he intended to terminate India's designation as a beneficiary developing country under the GSP program. Some $5.6 billion worth of Indian imports enjoyed duty-free status under the GSP in 2017. That made India the biggest beneficiary of the program. Official data showed that the U.S. had a $21 billion trade deficit with New Delhi in 2018. Meanwhile, the USTR said it was dropping Turkey because the country has achieved a higher level of economic development. The office said Turkey has increased gross national income per capita, lowered poverty rates, and diversified exports. Xiaocheng, CGTN.
The Chinese Premier has delivered the government work report to this year's gathering of the National People's Congress. The second session of the 13th NPC began earlier in Beijing. Li Keqiang listed measures and targets to stabilize the economy and improve social well-being. He admitted that there are challenges ahead, but laid out how they will be addressed. CGTN's Huna reports from the Great Hall of the People in Beijing.
Setting the tone for the country's development. Premier Li Keqiang set the GDP growth target for this year at between 6% and 6.5%. He looked back at what's been achieved. GDP grew by 6.6% last year, exceeding 90 trillion yuan. He admits the country faces mounting uncertainties in the international economic landscape. He called for more innovation and vowed to deepen reform in various sectors.
We deepened reforms of state capital and state-owned enterprises and made new gains in upgrading and restructuring SOEs and in improving their quality and performance. In addressing difficulties and issues encountered by the private sector, we used every feasible means to help them address problems.
In addition addition to the overall macroeconomy, the work report also reiterates the government's commitment to the state-owned enterprise reform and the support for the private sectors, in particular, the funding available for small and medium-sized enterprises.
I hope the government can reduce tax and fees on small and medium-sized enterprises so that they can make profits.
I hope the measures on easing the business environment for small and medium-sized enterprises could be implemented in full.
In laying out future tasks, primarily about larger-scale tax cuts, the government will deepen the value-added tax reform, reducing the current rate of 16% in manufacturing and other industries to 13%, and lower the rate in transportation, construction, and other industries from 10 to 9%. He promised to further open up and foster international economic cooperation and competition.
We will open more sectors and improve the scope of opening up, continue to promote opening up based on flows of goods and factors of production, and give greater emphasis to opening up based on rules and related institutions.
Policymakers will seek to create 11 million jobs this year, and the surveyed unemployment rate in urban areas will be kept at around 5.5%. The spillover effect of interest rate hikes in the United States and uncertainties arising from trade disputes among major powers risk driving down global economic and trade growth this year. Li admits that China, as a result, will face challenges, making these targets set today all the more important. Hou Na, CGTN, Beijing.
There was also a CPPCC press conference on Tuesday where we got the chance to hear what Deputy Central Bank Governor Chen Yilu had to say about the balance between financial risk control and stabilizing the economy. CGTN's Xie Cheng reports.
China's economy for 2019 is running on two campaigns, the deleveraging drive and economic stimulus. The two projects can work together, as Deputy Central Bank Governor Chen Yilu said during a sideline press conference at the MPC sessions in Beijing.
When the economy is under pressure, we should look at both fiscal and monetary counter-cyclical measures to provide room for deleveraging. The deleveraging drive has rooted out zombie firms to unleash financial resources to the efficient sectors of the economy. Meanwhile, we helped companies turn their debt into equity holdings to drag down the overall leverage in the economy and relieve some of the financial pressure on companies. Overall, we are strengthening the role of equity investment in financing the real economy. Those measures bode well for economic stability.
The current market consensus is that China is tamping down on the deleveraging drive and shifting towards stabilizing the economy, so that could lead to higher tolerance for off-balance sheet banking activities. But that change requires some tweaks on regulation. Meanwhile, fiscal challenges are still evident as China is cutting taxes and allowing local governments to take on more debt. What's left to be revised in economic policies?
Now we are facing some fiscal difficulties. We have enlarging fiscal deficit this year. Still, we have to put more money to people because that shows that growth of the economy will be benefited to all our people. They're shared by the people. It's not for the small businesses or for the government only.
Domestic concerns aside, Chinese companies' bottom line growth is still under the cloud of U.S. market access and European economic turbulence.
Now, the good news is U.S.-China will likely reach agreement at the end of this month. So this is good news. On the other hand, the Brexit also have created certain instability for Chinese growth. So how to Chinese company deal with such a Brexit is something that Chinese companies should be well prepared. A third one is maybe the EU's economic slowdown. With Italy and other countries, they may leave the EU or Eurozone. This also creates instability for China growth.
As China's political season continues, the market is hoping to see more policies to fund smaller companies, which are the biggest job creators. That will lift investors' confidence and boost the vitality of China's economy. Xia Cheng, CGTN, Beijing.
To Mexico, where tens of thousands of workers in Matamoros have walked off their jobs to demand a better pay and conditions. Our correspondent Alasdair Bavistock has more on this story.
Coca-Cola workers are on strike in Mexico at the country's border with the US state of Texas. They are demanding an annual bonus increase and 20% pay rise, citing exploitative working hours and an unfair share of their distribution company's massive expansion over recent years. The workers are employed at Arca Continental, a Coca-Cola distributor in northern Mexico.
You'd look at us and think it's only Coca-Cola that is fighting for better conditions, but everyone is fighting here, all the factories, because we know our rights and we have to be given what we deserve.
Juan isn't alone. Workers from 30 other local companies, from Coca-Cola to assembly plants, have been on strike for the past 3 weeks.
What's emboldened these strikers is the Mexican president's border stimulus plan, aimed at boosting local economies throughout the US border region. It doubled the minimum wage. These workers already make more than that, but argue that their salaries should also get a big boost.
The border stimulus plan also includes cutting the value-added tax rate by half. Nothing new at the border, but taking effect alongside reducing income tax by 1/3 and matching fuel prices at the pump on the other side of the border. The plan is aimed at stimulating economies across the region, which has been plagued by cartel violence.
Over the past 30 years, the economic growth has been in some central Mexican cities, on the Caribbean, and in some border cities. These are like small islands in a sea of poverty and abandonment, as we want to see growth across the board.
Yet the region's Northeast Business Union, a group of top businessmen from Matamoros, are concerned with the president's policy.
There is a lot of uncertainty here now for factory businesses who might invest in the region. We were expecting economic growth this year, given that we had managed to bring a halt to the local economic slowdown. But now with all the situation of the strikes, it's no longer seen as possible.
As President AMLO's campaign promises come into effect, the border region is feeling the effects of the change. But with the president showing no signs of relenting, it's now up to the local business executives and their workforce to adapt to the new status quo. Alasdair Bavistock, CGTN, Matamoros, Mexico.
The next story may sound like we're spinning a yarn. A number of men in New York are challenging social stereotypes through knitting. It's a craft that is mostly associated with women, but it's now giving the Brooklyn men a platform to express themselves. Take a look.
This is a rather interesting battlefront in the fight against sexism and gender stereotypes. Knitting has long been associated with women, but men who knit are becoming more comfortable stitching in public.
I guess growing up, I saw like my mother and my grandmother and my aunts doing stuff like this, and so I was always curious.
At the String Thing studio in Brooklyn, Thursday nights are men's nights. Men join together to knit, chat, and learn from each other.
Last string of it gives me a sense of creating. It gives me a sense of accomplishment, of seeing a project, starting it from the beginning, and then seeing it through.
Men are still a small group in this knitting community, but Louis Boria wants the old attitudes to change.
You know, there's a stigma attached to knitting, where people, or society, I should say, sees, the first thing people think of knitting, or crochet for that matter, there's like grandmas, right? So we come into the industry as we're here, you know, and I always go out and I love spreading the message of that knitting, fiber arts in general, has no boundaries.
Boria started knitting about 10 years ago. He became an internet sensation in late 2017 after a photo of him knitting on the New York City subway went viral. Several media interviews helped to raise the profile of men who knit.
I realized that I had a platform, and through that platform, I was able to share my story with others about following your passion, following your dreams.
Since his internet fame, he says business has been very good. He operates the Brooklyn Boy Knit, Arts, an online retail shop that offers handmade knitted hats, scarves, and baby clothes. They sell for up to $125 a piece, earning Boria a handsome profit. Brian Tucson, CGTN.
Let's now look at the commodities market. Oil fell towards $65 a barrel today, pressured by the restart of Libya's biggest oil field and on expectations of an increase in U.S. crude inventories. Oil also slipped on forecasts that the latest round of U.S. inventory reports will show rising crude stockpiles. Six analysts polled by Reuters estimated on average that crude stocks rose 400,000 barrels in the week to March 1st. Still ahead on Global Business. This Ugandan innovator turns to clean energy to save trees in the country.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Peninnah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Uganda is losing 8% of its forests each year, and according to the Forest Authority, much of that loss is due to the demand for firewood and charcoal to burn in traditional stoves. One Kampala entrepreneur has developed a new clean energy solution that may reduce Uganda's dependence on firewood and charcoal for cooking by using rocks and the sun. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
It's a high-tech solution to a decades-old problem.
The technology is we introduce the oxygen into the rocks, which makes it burn more efficiently.
These workers are assembling clean energy stoves that use volcanic rocks and solar panels instead of the firewood and charcoal burnt in traditional cook stoves in Uganda.
This is something that is different from a normal charcoal stove. Charcoal stoves use purely charcoal. Firewood stove use purely firewood. Yet the eco-stove uses volcanic rocks which are reusable.
The eco-stove is connected to a solar battery which drives the fan in the stove, helping to ignite the fire. That's a big change from the thick smoke in the homes of people who cook with firewood and charcoal. Smoke that's been linked to a number of respiratory health problems. Rebecca Chiwanka started using the eco-stove 4 years ago. She's concerned about doing her part to save the environment for her children and grandchildren, and she's also concerned about saving money.
It is very economical because ever since that time I've not bought any sack of charcoal. I just use the small particles of charcoal And also, it is very fast. It's like a gas cooker.
It takes about 30 minutes for Chiwanuka to prepare a meal on the eco stove. She says it's much more cost-effective, saving her 85% of the money she would have spent on charcoal. The stove is designed to do more than just cook a meal. Millions of Ugandans live without access to electricity.
As a complete unit, you light your home, charge your phone, cook your meal at the same time as you listen to an FM radio.
A fully installed EcoStove unit costs about $240. But as Uganda continues to lose hundreds of thousands of hectares of forest area, thousands of Ugandans are choosing to invest in a stove powered by rocks and the sun. Hilara Isiga, CGTN, Kampala.
Let's look at the currencies as we close. Ghana has lowered its customs exchange rate to 15 Sudanese pounds to the dollar from a previous rate of 18. This should be good news to traders who had repeatedly called on the government to lower the rate to help them purchase dollars as the country faces its crippling shortage of foreign currency. Let's leave it there for now on Global Business. We welcome your feedback. Send it to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platforms. I am Peninnah Karibe. Thank you for watching.